witches, and welcome back to Activist Twitch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in today's video we're gonna look at the folkloric legends, tales, myths, both in the UK, in the British Isles, and in Italy, where I'm from. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a coffee, and if you like what I do here, you can support me directly there with a monthly recurring donation or a single donation, or even get a tarot reading with me Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the foreseeable future, part of my profits from tarot reading go split evenly between Kuchus to Gaza, who supports Palestinian refugees in Cairo, and the Good Law Project, who's trying to bring back trans rights to the UK, because trans rights are human rights. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. Also, we are in phase 3 of Witches for Palestine. More information about that, you want to join us on the Rage Circle of the 6th of September, click down in the description below. By now you know the drill, we've done these videos since April, so we're gonna look into the dates that are relevant and important for folkloric reasons in the UK for the month of September. We're gonna look at Italy, and we're gonna look at the Roman Pagan festival. And having been raised in Italy, but also following a Religio Romana, my deities belong to the Roman pantheon rather than the Greek one, as much as they are of derivation of the Greek one. You know, it's the stuff that interests me. Key dates for September, as you can guess, are first and foremost the autumn equinox, when light and darkness go to the same point, and then from that moment onwards we're just gonna get shorter days and longer nights. I mean, we've been reducing our daylight hours since the summer solstice, and after the 22nd of September, we're gonna have nights that are longer than the days. And you know, it's part of going into the dark season, and it's part of why it also feels cozy, because you have all the fairy lights and artificial lights, but let's be honest with ourselves, there's going to be less lights, and we're gonna see in October, actually, what we can do against stuff like seasonal affective disorder, but all in good time. One thing that I thought of mentioning in case you happen to be in London is that on the 22nd of September, which is the equinox this year, the Druid Order holds a ceremony for the equinox in Primrose Hill. You might have seen in a couple of my vlogs that I have gone to the Ostara ceremony that they do at Tower Hill. Well, the one that they do for Mabon for the autumn equinox is actually in Primrose Hill. So in case you're in London and you're interested, it's nice to just witness it, really. I'll leave a link to the Druid Order website down in the description below. The other important date for the British calendar, but also the Italian one, we'll go into that in a second, is Michaelmas, which in the Italian tradition is just San Michael, the Archangel Michael. It's his day on the 29th of September, and we'll see how traditions take that very seriously. Important dates in September, according to the Roman pagan calendar, were, well, the first, the calends of September, which were dedicated to Giove Tonante, Jupiter Tonans, the Thunderer, and Juno Regina of the Aventine Hill. They have been taken over by other traditions in Italy. We'll see it when we go into the Italian side of this. The 23rd of September was the anniversary of the rededication of the Temple of Apollo in Campo Marzio. And Latona in Roman, which is Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, was also honored this day. And on the 26th of September, we had the anniversary of the temple of Venus Genetrix, which is the incarnation of Venus that Julius Caesar claimed was the Venus of his heritage and that was in his blood. As I do work with Venus, I thought it was worth mentioning. Right, first things first. Moons. What are the new moons and full moons of September, and how do we use them for magic? Well, usually in September we would have the full moon in Pisces and the new moon in Libra. However, we get the second new moon in Virgo. Sometimes it happens, it's when in one season there are actually 4 new moons, therefore the third new moon is actually called the black moon, and it's supposedly more powerful, so it was the new moon in August. But yes, we have the full moon in Pisces on the 7th of September, which is also a lunar eclipse. And then, on the 21st of September, we have another new moon in Virgo. Now, for the full moon in Pisces, the 7th of September, there would be all that magic that can be done on Pisces. Pisces is the mutable sign of water, and it has a lot to do with creativity, your inner world, your emotions, sort of going with the flow because it's water and it's also mutable, so it really goes. And it could be an interesting time to cast spells about sleep, dream work, psychic work of all kinds, taking moon baths, drink a lunar tea, meditate on the collective unconscious. However, The full moon in Pisces that we have on the 7th of September is also a lunar eclipse. I don't think it can be quite seen from the UK, but eclipse energy in the witchy community, there's this sort of idea that keeps going on, and I kind of get it, that have quite the unrestrained energy. So whereas on a normal full moon or new moon, you could gather that energy. Some people do it with moon water. I am not comfortable with doing waters because waters harbor bacteria too easily. I remember trying to do moon water with water that I got from the White Well in Glastonbury, and within 2 weeks it already had created bacteria and just, in my perception, it's not healthy on the long run. However, you can definitely do, don't quote me on that, but if I were to try and harvest the power of the moon and then use it afterwards, I would do it in oils. Oils don't spoil as easily, or, you know, something that is cut with alcohol in high percentage enough that therefore it kills bacteria. And at that point, you don't necessarily drink it, but, you know, if you want to use a couple of drops in a bath, not necessarily in a tea, because then, yeah, in a bath is the most acceptable, that's doable. And that's doable in a better way than using water that has allowed bacteria to grow over weeks or months if you saved moon water over weeks and months. Fundamentally, if you make moon vodka, you can put a few drops in a bathtub without worrying that you're putting literally colonies of bacteria in your bath water. But that's me. I think too much about these things maybe. But yeah, I'm not comfortable with doing waters. I'm more comfortable with doing oils or alcohols. However, back to the original topic of this. This moon in Pisces is an eclipse. Eclipse have this unrestrained and unpredictable energy. So I remember since the very beginning of my practice reading in books about doing magic with the moon or with the phases of the moon, to be careful about harvesting and then using the energy of eclipses because they are unpredictable, which means that even whatever you want to use that kind of harvested energy in the form of, again, waters, oils, alcohol, whatever, the one of an eclipse is not necessarily a guarantee that your intention is going to go in that direction because it's... So be mindful of that. The full moon in Pisces on the 7th of September is also an eclipse. So it's energy to harvest and use sensibly, if to use at all, especially because then Pisces, again, has to do with our inner world and psychic abilities and all of that. And I'm hearing too much lately about psychosis and specifically AI psychosis. And unfortunately, I've seen that, surprisingly, I've done a video about AI art. I didn't realize that there was a worse part of the AI world, which is literally people talking to AI chatbots, thinking that through the chatbots they get access to the universe, higher knowledge, deities. No, that's not what AI is. Just because it's random, it doesn't mean that the universe is communicating to you through that. But that's what psychosis is, and so people start to believe that through these randomly generated strings of words that pareidolia in our mind interprets as a sentient being. Yeah, let's just be careful about that. That's not what... That's why we were not ready for AI. And also AI is a misnomer because it's not intelligent. But, you know, just be mindful of that. And I'm saying that related to the full moon in Pisces because if you already are much in your inner world and maybe let's not make things get out of hand. But that's just my 2 cents on this full moon in Pisces. And then again, we have another new moon in Virgo. I already discussed the new moon in Virgo more in detail in the video about August because we had the first new moon in Virgo in August. I'll slightly repeat myself here, but Virgo is this sign of mutable earth. And it's identified with this characteristic of being very steadfast, of being very diligent, of putting ducks in rows. Personally, what I've used the last new moon in Virgo was to do a remove obstacles kind of spell. Because for a year now, I've had to learn how to drive so that I can pass my driving license test. and I have a mental block. And so to remove that mental block and get me started so that I can start studying and pass my driving theory exam, I've done a spell in the new moon in Virgo, trying to open up the road for me so that I can study and learn and pass this test. So that is definitely something that it's so far so good. Like it has put the idea of being constant about it definitely more at the forefront of my mind. On the topic of using the new moon in Virgo, in any case that you might want to remove obstacles so that you can get stuff done, the most important day to do that, in my perception, according to how the calendar is set at the moment, is the 20th of September. Why? The actual new moon is on the 21st, yes, but the 20th of September is also a Saturday. Now, when you want to do spells that have to do with removal of obstacles, banishment of bad things, protection from these things, Saturdays tend to be the best day for that because it's the day of Saturn. Saturn as a planet rules these kind of things about protection, about boundaries, about removal. So when you have the new moon being on the 21st and the moon is already in Virgo on Saturday the 20th, that's the best day to do that. So unexpectedly, not the day of the new moon, but when it's the last sliver of balsamic and the moon is already in Virgo, go for it. Banishment, removal, protection, that's your day. Now, to go in sunset, sunlight, sun hours here in the UK, we're really getting the idea that we're going in the dark season, hey? The sun properly rises in the east. Up until now, it used to rise on the northeast because, you know, inclination. I explained in a video before, I think in the solstice, so the June one. But yeah, the inclination of the earth is the reason why the sun rising is always in the east, rises more northeast during the summer and more southeast during the winter. Right now, because Equinox, right at the east. So here in Cardiff, in South Wales, yeah, on the 1st of September, the sun will rise at 6:24 a.m. and it will set at 8 p.m. precise o'clock. So we have 13 and a half hours of light, but by the 30th of September things have changed and we're going to lose almost an hour on both sides because the sun is going to rise at 7:10 a.m. and it's going to set at 18:54. So we have lost an hour and like 6 minutes in the evening and almost 50 minutes in the morning. When it goes dark, it really goes dark here. It's something that, despite having spent more than half my life now in the UK and Ireland, I will never get used to. Like the way that it can get dark here, it's just something. I used to live on the 45th parallel. So northwest Italy, where I come from, was around the 45th parallel, which is literally midway between the North Pole and the equator. We are 51 parallels. 6 parallels doesn't seem that much, but it is. The tides go along a few days before and after the new moon and the full moon. Those are the spring tides, which are the ones that have the most difference between high tide and low tide. And here on the Severn, which is the tide, the river, but the river is actually the sea that we have in Cardiff and that we have like on all South Wales and North Cornwall up to Bristol. The Severn is the second highest tide in the world. We feels it, we really feels it. So the spring tide is going to be the 8th and 10th of September and then again the 22nd and 23rd. So as mentioned, just after the full moon and just after the new moon because the combined pull of the sun and the moon makes it more extreme. When it's low spring tide, it's actually a good time for coastal fossil hunting, just so you know. That being said, because we have a lot of stuff to go through in Italy, and that's why I'm skipping a couple of things for the Celtic traditions for this month, we're going to Italy. Buckle up, Buttercup! So September is actually a month that I remember personally very intensely, very fondly, possibly because one of the main things that my grandparents, who were farmers, used to do in our farmer village was having vineyards. So September is harvest time for vineyards, vendemmia. So that is very much giving me the idea of, yes, September, it's all about folk stuff that we do in farmers' village in Italy, isn't it? And it also happens to be the month that my village had its usual sagra. So for a week, there was a festival sort of going on. Every night there would be like a band playing, there would be the entire village sitting together in the main square, eating together. It's just, I thought it was normal. Apparently it's not. But yearly we do this, and we do it in September. Because supposedly the main church of my village is actually dedicated to the birth of Mary, and the birth of Mary, St. Mary, is considered to be the 8th of September. Hence. But let's go in order. The 1st of September is actually what we're first looking at. And as I mentioned before, the 1st of September was Jupiter Tonans, which was Giove Tonante, the Thunderer. Of course, as Christianity does, it has acquired this day and translated it to a saint, but kept the tradition. The saint is Sant'egidio, and it's another one of those days, the 1st of September, that is used for weather forecast divination. So according to what the weather is going to be like on the 1st of September, you were supposed to be able to divine what the going into winter would be, so what the entire autumn would be. So of course, if September 1st was actually sunny, it would have been a nice and warm autumn. On the other hand, if it was raining, it was going to be quite a cold autumn getting until Christmas. On the 8th of September, indeed, it's the birth of St. Mary, which again is the sagra of my own village. It's considered the day that marks a line for farmers between working the fields, doing the harvest in the fields before the 8th of September, and after the 8th of September you start doing farmers' work that it's within the farm. So you start the canning, you start doing conserve. It's something that it's very much to my mind. I've mentioned before that one of the things that I used to do with my grandmother was going to to gather the hazelnuts that would fall from the hazel trees of our neighbor. But because these trees were on the border, on the line next to the back of our house, a lot of hazelnuts would fall into our backyard. So around September, with my grandmother, we would go to gather the hazelnuts. So that's another thing that we're going to come in a moment, because there is a day specifically about nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, but all in good time. Something that I found interesting, and that it's brought in the Italian Almanac, not necessarily relative to a day, but relative to this division between now what we do is in the house, now what we do is in the farm, we're not necessarily as much in the fields anymore. One thing was about the magic properties of lamp oil, because we would use oil to light up lamps. And apparently there is many a saying that literally go, well, once you are past the vernal equinox, the one in March, you stop using as much oil and as much lamps because days are getting longer. Well, in September you start to bring out the lamps again and therefore use the oil because the nights are getting longer and so you need more artificial light. In Lombardy, the lamp oil was seen as also curative. It was a health remedy. Another peculiar health remedy that I had no idea about was something that happens on Flying Ant Day. Now, Flying Ant Day, here in the UK, I swear, is just in the summer. But it changes every time because it has to do with temperature. Well, there are certain places in Italy, I discovered, where Flying Ant Day is such a thing, in such numbers, and the point of Flying Ant Day is that that is the mating day of the flying ants. The males die immediately after mating. So there would be places where the Monte di Formiche would happen, where basically they would gather all the corpses remain of the male flying ants, and that would be used either in protection sachets or actually to extract formic acid from, which admittedly it's where it comes from. So I don't know. I imagine you extract it with a process of like putting the flying ants in oil. I don't want to know, but you extract formic acid that way. And admittedly, formic acid is antibacterial and antiparasitic, so I can kind of see why it was seen as sort of a healing thing. But I didn't know that in Italy we used Flying Ant Day that way. Apparently, Caterina Sforza used to use formic acid in inner beauty treatments. It's also a time to harvest juniper berries, which not only you make gin from, but it's also a plant that is seen as very protective. Especially in Piedmont, where, again, I come from, you would plant a juniper berry outside your house for protection, and you would start saving sprigs of juniper to keep in the house for protection. You would also use sprigs of juniper in the bonfires that you do around Halloween, Samhain, because the juniper is seen as so protective that if you burn it in festivities related to the dead, the juniper is supposed to exorcise any bad spirit and so sort of keep it in boundaries. Let's go to the 9th of September, which is San Gorgonio. San Gorgonio is used as a forecast weather divination day as well, especially in Veneto, which is in the northeast of Italy. Same story. If it's a good day, it's going to be a good autumn. If it's a bad day, get ready because it's going to be wet and cold. The 10th of September is San Nicola, and San Nicola is the day of hazelnuts. Specifically, it was a day where you would still do forecast divination, but through the hazelnuts. And so by that day, there have been enough raining day, there has been enough storms that the hazelnuts have dropped from the trees. And according to how many hazelnuts have fallen, how big the harvest of the hazelnuts is, which is already like on the ground, you can divine how much snow there's going to be coming winter. And guess what? Lots of hazelnuts means that it will be a very snowy winter. I genuinely like hazel and hazelnuts. I keep saying it, it's very true. It's my connection with my grandmother, to the point that close to the road where I live, there's actually wild hazel trees, and I've learned to recognize them because one of the main things that I've done in my witchcraft practice since starting 3 years ago is literally learning about plants, herbs, anything around. I go and identify any weed that I find around, which seems not much, but it makes you understand more the land you're in. And I was really surprised and happy to find that at the beginning of my road there's these wild hazels. And literally a few weeks ago, because they cut some of them because it was literally coming onto the pavement, I just found a hazel. I just found a hazelnut coming home. And so I've taken it up and I've put it on my ancestral altar close to my grandmother because it's something we shared there. Along with the hazelnuts, there's also a lot to talk about of walnuts, and both the tree and the nut in Italy around this time. Let's talk about this because something that I discovered and we're going to talk about because of the walnuts is the witch trials in Italy. Yeah, we're getting there, we're getting there. I was surprised that it didn't come up before, we're going there now. Like, first things first, walnuts. Walnuts are coming down the walnut trees as well. If you find a walnut whose shell is actually not just 2 parts, but 3 parts, keep it. That's gonna keep luck with you, that's gonna protect you. There was the belief that if you give 9 walnuts to a sick person, it would help them heal. There was also the belief that you would take a branch of walnut tree to keep just behind your door, your main door, much like a broom, and it would keep you protected from witches. Now, why would it keep you protected from witches? It's very, again, we have a weird way to associate things. The walnut is considered one of the witchy trees in Italy because of La Noce di Benevento. Now, La Noce di Benevento might be the witchiest place and the origins of all witches stories in Italy, really. It was this walnut tree in Benevento, which is northeast of Naples, so in South Italy. The theories are that because around this walnut there were a lot of pagan rites from the Longobards, who used to be from the north, but they had conquered the south at some point, so around like 600 current era, there would still be all these pagan traditions done around this walnut tree, and that has become the belief that this is a witchy place, a witchy thing. It's supposed to be the place where the witches would fly to the Sabbath to meet the devil. Why do we believe this? Well, Italy had one of the first, if not the first, witch trial in the witch hunts frenzy that happened between the 15th and 17th, 18th century, actually, some places. So the witch hunts era is considered 1450 to 1750. Well, this happened in 1429. And it was this woman called Matteo da Todi, who was considered the strega of Cima Bianca, of Rapa Bianca, which was the place where she lived. And she was accused of witchcraft. She was accused of witchcraft because supposedly she was healing people. Ha! You healer! She was making love potions, and of course then she was accused of infanticide. And she was one of the first people tried and executed for witchcraft. And Italy did burn its witches at the stake. Yeah. She was tortured, of course, and under torture she confessed. Under torture. Not under duress at all, just to make it stop. But yeah, under torture she confessed that she would use this flying ointment to go to the Sabbath at the Noce di Benevento, at the Walnut in Benevento. And she shared the charm that she would have used along with the ointment to fly to the Noce of Benevento. And that's why the myth of the Noce of Benevento started. She was in Umbria. Matteo da Todi. Todi is in Umbria. So it's the north side of central Italy. Benevento is, again, next to Naples, so it's the south of Italy. So, of course, it's not a distance that can be traveled in any way, so she would fly. And therefore, flying ointment, and there was this charm, which was unguento, unguento, mandami alla noce di Benevento, subra agua e supra vento e supra le donne maltempo. Which means ointment, ointment, send me to the walnut of Benevento, over water and over wind, and over any kind of bad weather. The interesting thing is that after this was the first witch trial, a lot of other women were tried in Italy. And I think that's how, you know, sort of mass hysteria starts, because a lot of them then shared similar variations on this charm. But yeah, what was the fault of this woman? She was healing, she confessed to healing people. On the 22nd of September is the autumn equinox. Day and night last the same, which also, if you use planetary hours, the equinoxes are the only days where planetary hours during the night and the day actually last an hour. Because if you use planetary hours, you know, the point of planetary hours is that you divide the hours of light by 12, which means that during summer an hour is longer than an hour of 60 minutes, and therefore during winter an hour is shorter than 60 minutes. On the equinoxes, they are 60 minutes. Aha. So, whereas the harvest in August would have been about cereals and grains, by the 20th, 22nd, by San Matteo, really, Saint Matthew, the harvest of September would be done. The harvest of September would include nuts and fruit, like indeed figs and grapes, because wine, vendemmia, and then you make wine. San Matteo is what overwrote this tradition of the equinox. And by San Matteo, there were all the tradition that was sort of, again, draw a line in the sand saying, okay, after this, there's no more harvest to be done. But it would still maintain all those characteristics that are related to the equinox, which is usually the moment where you draw the balance, like you consider everything that you harvested, you consider what of the grains is kept for food throughout the winter or to sell, and then what of it actually is used as seed for the next year. It's the time where you draw numbers and understand how much you've made, basically. And the funny thing to me is that these themes were related to the equinox, to this balancing. It's unsurprising that on the equinox then it starts Libra season, haha. But also the funny thing to me is that we overwrote it with San Matthew, because San Matthew used to be a tax collector before converting and then becoming a saint, which I find kind of funny. What can I say? The 26th of September is Santa Cosma and Damiano, which are incredibly witchy saints. So before them, the day was for Castor and Pollux, who are the twin sons of Zeus and Leda. They were called for healing spells. And now we have replaced them with Cosma and Damiano. What I find interesting is that Cosma and Damiano are healers that practice the medicinal art through divine intervention. Sounds familiar? On the 29th, we get to Michaelmas, which is a thing here in the UK as well, but it's San Michael, Sant'Arcangelo Michele. And there are good food traditions about the Arcangelo Michele in Italy. The most interesting thing to me is that a lot of San Michael in Italy is syncretized with older pagan entities. One is Odin, because supposedly they come with the swords, they fight. Like it's very fascinating that the Archangel Michael, of all things, is syncretized to Odin. But also in Piedmont, again, where I come from, there is La Sacra di San Michele, which is east of Turin, which was built on a temple that it was already dedicated to Luke, of Lunarzat. Because yes, in the northwest of Italy, we used to have Celts, and so we used to actually have the cult of Luke and other Celtic deities. And on the temple of Luke, they built the Sacra di San Michele. If it rains today, it rains until Christmas. That's the divination weather for the 29th of September. Apparently, farm-wise, it was the day where farmers' contracts with landlords would end. And so Fare San Michele would be a euphemism for having to move, because if the contract with your landlord expired and he wouldn't renew it, you would have to move to another piece of land, another farm, and therefore it would be the day that farmers move through the land. It is also the last day to gather blackberries, because of a legend that actually comes from Britain apparently, which is the legend of St. Michael dragging down Lucifer from the sky, and Lucifer falls on a bush of brambles, and according to different legends, his blood, his spit, or his piss end up on the brambles. And so after the 29th, you do not have access, you shouldn't gather blackberries anymore because they are tainted. Which is one of those legends that are born because likely after that point the berries have been out long enough and they would actually get tainted, whether from insects or from the weather, so it actually wouldn't be healthy for people to eat, and therefore the translation of "this is not healthy anymore" becomes the devil has put their finger on it, and therefore after the 29th of September, blackberries are not for you, blackberries are for the devil. September, as we mentioned, has to do a lot with fruit, and two more fruit is worth giving attention to. One is figs, which I have a partiality to because we used to have a fig tree in the yard of my farm with my grandparents, so usually when I start to see figs in supermarkets around September, I buy them and I put them on my ancestor altar because it's something that we used to have in our courtyard. Like the allotment was the courtyard, and yeah. Chestnuts is also what you start gathering, I think by the first week of October really. But here in the UK, so it might very well be that in Italy is earlier. Chestnuts are I really like them. It's a very autumnal thing to me. There was a way to divine with chestnuts. You would throw a bunch in the fire, and the louder they would pop and explode, the more they would reveal that there were bad spirits in the house. But don't worry, because the louder the sound, it also means that that sound is exorcising those presence. However, despite the sound itself supposedly exorcising, when the chestnuts would pop too loud, people would also then sprinkle salt on the fire, because salt is protective, and so you would exorcise even more if there were bad spirits in the house. Chestnuts are very important, especially for poorer people and poorer farmers, because rather than use grain flour, they would use chestnut flowers to make bread throughout the winter. There was a tradition in the Apennine around Tuscany where, to salvage as much as possible of the harvest of chestnuts, people would gather in the center of the village, would light a bonfire, would bring the fire to the forest of chestnuts, making sure that the Streghi, which is the specific kind of witches that there would be in that area, which would attack the sacks of chestnuts, they would be exorcised, they would be kept at bay. And also there was this legend that you would realize that they were there, that they were in the trees, because they would make the trees move when there was no wind to move them. which is incredibly similar to the legend of the boggarts that we have here in the UK, especially in Wales. Something similar to that happened to myself and Raven when we were in North Wales last year. It was a bit freaky, I will not lie. Yeah, like the trees were moving and water from the leaves was falling on us even if it wasn't raining. And if the sound was that just the trees above us would be moving, despite the fact that we were moving on a road, so something on the trees was following us. And then thankfully the road ended and we went through a path through the mountain and that ended, but it was a bit freaky, I will not lie. Supposedly something similar happens with the Streghi in Tuscany. And apparently there's this thing that if you hear asked, you need to be very careful, because if you give the wrong answer, you become a strego yourself. And the question that gets asked is, per chi è la notte? Who's the night for? And if you hear that, the right answer to give, to not become a strego yourself, is per te, per me, per tutti quelli che camminano di notte. Which means for you, for me, for everybody that walks in the night. Yeah, Italy doesn't quite have the concept of witch itself, but every single place have their own legends about their own kind of spirits, elves, witches, and the Streghi are part of this, and you need to protect the chestnuts from them. So there you go. In some parts of, especially North Italy, I think, there are also the legends about little elves that start to come out from the cellars, because the grapes that we have harvested throughout September start fermenting in the barrels. And by the 2nd of November, which is the Day of the Dead, you will get Vino Novello, the new wine, which is so nice and so sweet, but so heavy in alcohol as well, and you get drunk so easily. Do be careful. But yeah, there's this idea that along with the Streghi, with the chestnuts, you also have the elves in the cellars. Hells, fairies, it's convoluted, folletti, we call them in Italian. In northeast Italy, in Alto Adige, which was the part of Italy that used to be Austria, or was given back and forth anyway, they have the legend of the Norgels, which are like little fairies, little dwarves. At that point, when they come down, they have a claim on anything that hasn't been harvested. So you leave it there, sort of as an offering, because by the end of September, they have a right to come down to the valleys, and anything that was on the fields, it's theirs now. That concludes our exploration of what happens in September according to folklorian legends and magic here in the British Isles and also in Italy, where I was born and raised. I hope this was useful, entertaining, and until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the patriarchy together, because there's need for it.